Hi, and welcome to Assignment 11, Reviewing the Math Standards. This assignment will allow you to become acquainted with the math standards for your grade, and also some of the grades that come before and after yours, and will also allow you to compare and contrast the Common Core state standards to your current California standards. So let's get started. The first thing that you're going to want to do is open up the California Common Core state standards for math. And you'll also probably want the note sheet as well. In order to download the note sheet, you can click on this link. It will bring up a Word doc file, so you can either print that document and handwrite into it, or you can type directly into the document. If you're using a tablet device, you won't be able to do either of those things. Instead, what you might want to do is have a piece of paper and take a look at the note sheet and then kind of create the same sort of document on a piece of paper and take some notes that way. Unfortunately, you cannot type directly into a Word document from an iPad or print from an iPad at this point. So we've got a couple of these documents up, so we're going to pull the Common Core State Standards up, and then we're going to pull up our note sheet. And the purpose of this assignment is to think about and make some observations about Common Core, and then to think about how that compares to what we're currently doing in math. So the first thing that we want you to do before you take a look at the standards is to choose a grade band. And that grade band will either be K6, 4 through 8, or grades 7 through high school, just so you get a good span of time so that you can see how the math standards build and get a sense of that. For the purpose of this demo, we'll just look at K6. So we're going to go to the standards. And the kindergarten standards actually start on page 4. Of course, before the kindergarten standards begin, you have an explanation of all the 8 mathematical practices. And then we get to the grade K overview. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just make some observations. What do I notice? The first thing that I notice is that our math practices are in this box, sort of on the side here. So I'm going to write the mathematical practices are in a box to the side. I'm also noticing that the standards are organized into 5 domains with clusters listed under each domain. So we've got counting and cardinality as a domain, and then these 3 bulleted items are the clusters that exist in that particular domain. And then I'm noticing, as we scroll down and go into the standards, we've got the domains and the clusters, but now the individual standards are listed under each of those clusters. So then I know what the specific grade expectations are for kindergarten. I'm wondering too, the domains and clusters seem a little bit different than the clusters and domains that exist in California as well, so that's something that I might pay attention to when I'm looking at the California standards. Then I'm just going to skim past kindergarten and kind of take a look at those, and of course you might want to go a little bit more in depth with the standards and look and see what kinds of things students are asked to do, how their thinking transforms and changes from grade to grade. And we're going to go down and look at first grade. And one thing that I'm noticing is that the domains stay the same except for counting and cardinality, which sort of disappears. So now we have operations in algebraic thinking, number and operations in base 10, and measurement, data, and geometry. But then I'm also noticing that the same mathematical practices exist for grade 1. So those are remaining consistent throughout the grades. And those are just some things that I'm noticing really quickly. Of course, if you're looking at grade K6, you'll want to look at all the grade levels and make some observations like that. And as I said before, maybe go a little bit more in depth with each standard to see the types of thinking students are going to have to be able to do. Now my job is to transition to comparing the Common Core state standards with what we currently have, because we really do need to think about how our work changes with the transition to the Common Core. So in order to do that, we can kind of put this off to the side, the Common Core state standards, and I'll bring up a copy of our current California standards. And of course, this copy of the California standards exists in the Schoology forum. You can link directly to it and download a copy of it. And because my grade band is K6, I'm just going to start by looking at kindergarten. And I'm just going to scroll down a little bit, and I'm also going to make sure that I have my note sheet. One thing that I'm noticing is that the domains really are different in kindergarten. So where we had counting cardinality before, now we have number sense. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through this a little bit. And I'm also noticing that as I scroll down and look past the domains and the standards, that there seems to be this separate mathematical reasoning strand in kindergarten, or a mathematical reasoning domain in kindergarten. But in California, these types of skills seem to be addressed through the mathematical practices that remain consistent throughout the grade levels. I'm also wanting to look at some of the content differences to see how those expectations are changing. So I want to go back up and look at some of the standards that are in here. And I'm noticing that in number sense, kindergartners have to count up to 30. But I remember from the Common Core, when I looked at the kindergarten standards, so I'm going to go back up here, that students need to be able to count to 100 by ones and tens. So that seems like a significant content difference. So I'm also looking at that kind of thing. I'm also noticing that in the Common Core standards versus the California standards, that there are some conceptual differences. Students really need to seem to know how to apply concepts. For example, they need to know how to figure out if something is greater than or less than, but also like why things are greater than or less than, or why that's important. So I'm noticing some application language in kindergarten that doesn't really seem to exist in the California standards. In the California standards, it's more like count, know, use, recognize. So there's more like identification language, whereas in the Common Core state standards, the language is a little bit more in depth. And I think that that really comes out with this particular standard here, that it says count to answer how many questions, about as many as 20 things arranged in a line, a rectangular array, or a circle. So it seems like instead of just counting as sort of an end product in California, in the Common Core standards, students need to be able to count to answer a question. So there's a much more explicit call out as to why students need to learn these skills. And that's one big difference that I'm seeing in terms of the way that the standards are changing and how students' learning needs to change. What we're asking you to do is do that level of thinking as you look across your grade band. This may take you a little bit of time, but it's important to really have an understanding of exactly how these standards are different, because that also tells us what we need to do differently as teachers in the classroom. So take some time, look through these standards. Once you have an opportunity to look through them pretty thoroughly, we're going to ask you to go back into the Schoology forum and in assignment 11, and you're just going to click Next, which will take you to the discussion. And then you'll notice in the discussion there are 3 discussion questions. What we're asking you to do is to respond to these discussion questions. You can do that electronically, you can do that in person with a group of colleagues, whatever supports your learning the most. We hope you enjoy looking at the math standards. Thank you so much.